Imagine sitting quietly on a flight home, dressed in nothing more than a hoodie and jeans, when suddenly strangers accuse you of stealing. The cabin falls silent, police are called, and every eye brands you guilty. But just as the handcuffs close in, you reveal an identity that shatters the entire illusion of power. This isn't just a story about prejudice at 30,000 feet. It's about what happens when truth refuses to bow, and how one woman turned humiliation into a national reckoning. Stay with us to the very end. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit subscribe right now so you never miss the next chapter. Hard to believe they let just anyone into first class these days. Clara Whitmore's voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to slice through the polished calm of the cabin. Her words fell like salt into champagne dissolving quickly, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste for anyone within earshot. A few heads lifted, most sank back down. The pageant of civility continued, hot towels draped neatly, champagne poured at 45 degrees, flight attendants smiling with practiced precision. In seat 2A, Naomi Carter closed her e-reader. On the screen lingered notes on an aviation security reform bill, something she planned to review before the committee hearing next week. But today, in her soft blue cardigan and worn jeans, she wasn't Senator Carter. She was simply a daughter racing back to New York because her father had been admitted to the hospital. On her wrist, the leather band of her watch pressed slightly tighter with every quick beat of her heart, a quirk from her law school debate days. When she was nervous, she didn't tremble. She clenched. Clara and her husband Richard slid into seats 2C and 2D, moving like people accustomed to staff waiting on them. Richard laid his camel hair coat across the armrest, checking his Patek Philippe with the air of a man timing markets. Clara's diamonds caught the cabin light. When their eyes swept across Naomi, it wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. The old unspoken question was there, sharp as ever. What are you doing here? The window shades slid down. Dallas shrank into silver threads below. Naomi inhaled the mix of roasted coffee and pressed cotton towels. 10:30 a.m., nonstop to New York. If all went well, she'd be at her father's bedside in 90 minutes, holding his hand, listening to him scold her for looking too thin. Her fingers brushed her phone. The doctor's late-night update still sat at the top of the screen, cautiously positive. But with worn-out hearts, even the good news was fragile. A young attendant approached, name tag reading Evan, pre-departure. Beverage for you, ma'am. Champagne, orange juice, or ginger tea? Naomi smiled. Ginger tea, thank you, Evan. She made sure to use his name. Simple recognition, a courtesy first-class passengers often forgot. Clara reached for her glass. Diamond ring flashing. 2 champagnes. And bring me another towel, this one smells. Richard nodded his agreement, the kind of nod that had been breaking waiters and drivers into motion for decades. Evan hesitated, then bowed his head and retreated. Naomi noticed the dip in his shoulders. The engines roared, then softened into that cushioned hum only wealth could buy. Emails blinked on Naomi's tablet. She tried to focus on her aide's agenda, but her mind drifted. Rights, she thought, aren't just words on paper. They're feelings being granted or being denied, etched into the space between looks and gestures. Richard, Clara suddenly gasped, her voice cutting through the hush. My phone. Where's my phone? She pawed through her purse, flung open the seat pocket, bent toward the floor. Nothing. Then her gaze snapped, inevitably, toward seat 2A. Excuse me, she said, syrup-coating steel. You wouldn't have happened to see it, would you? A gold iPhone. I had it right here. Naomi looked up. I haven't, ma'am. Her voice calm, each word placed with deliberate weight. Richard leaned in, elbows on the divider, his smile stiff as a stamped seal. No problem. To settle this quickly, why don't you just open your bag? We'll be done in a moment. Naomi caught her own reflection in his eyes, just a woman in casual clothes, a soft leather tote at her feet. A suspect. It wasn't a new experience, but it chilled her just the same. Evan returned, corporate smile back in place. "Ma'am, to keep things smooth, would you mind just letting us glance through your bag?" His voice landed soft, but the request carried weight. Naomi set her tablet down, straightened her spine, hands resting lightly on the seatbelt buckle. "No, if someone misplaces their phone, that doesn't obligate me to prove my innocence. I haven't seen it." The air shifted. A businessman in row 1 sniffed, annoyed. A young woman flicked her eyes toward Naomi, then back down. Silence has a flavor. This one tasted like avoidance, like "don't drag me into it." Clara clutched her shawl. Unbelievable. She turned to Evan. "Get the lead attendant, and the captain." Naomi exhaled, long and warm, as if to steady herself. Constitutional law phrases lined up in her head. Probable cause, unreasonable search, due process. Not weapons but anchors. Marta, the lead attendant, appeared, her expression tight but rehearsed. "Miss Carter." "Naomi, our goal is everyone's comfort. If you could just open your bag, we'll resolve this quickly." Naomi's voice stayed even. "Marta, I respect your job, but I will not comply. Allowing myself to be searched because of an unfounded accusation isn't peacekeeping. It's surrender." Marta's jaw clenched. Behind her, Clara sighed theatrically, performing her role as wronged lady. Richard tapped his ring against the armrest, the rhythm of someone used to getting his way. The captain didn't come. Instead, Naomi heard the faint click of a radio. Marta stepped away. Naomi leaned back, eyes open. She thought of her father, the math teacher with ink-stained fingers and laughing eyes. He hadn't spoken often about the slights he endured. He'd simply taught her how to walk through them without letting them define her. "Don't let other people's smallness make you small," he always said. She could hear him now in her pulse. 15 minutes dragged. Lunch trays clattered down. Clara refused hers. Richard muttered into his phone about charity auctions. Naomi sipped water, forcing the tightness down her throat. Not fear, just fatigue. Sometimes the hardest part of life wasn't the work. It was the constant explaining of your right to simply exist. As the wheels kissed the New York runway, a chime sounded and the PA crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated once we reach the gate. We have a service matter to address." Murmurs rippled. First-class passengers don't like to wait. The door opened. 2 officers boarded, one broad, middle-aged, face carved from stone. The other younger, tall and wiry, scanning with watchful eyes. Marta stood stiffly beside them. Richard surged to his feet, relief lighting his face. "Officers, thank God." That woman, he pointed toward Naomi, refused to cooperate. "My wife's phone is missing. We demand her bag be searched." The older cop turned, resting a hand on his belt. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to stand up. Bring your bag. Let's get this over with." Naomi met his eyes. For a beat, the entire cabin hung in silence, like the pause before a plunge. This was the fracture point, the place where so many stories bent toward darkness. She rose slowly, not rushed, not fearful. On her shoulder, the cardigan slipped. Her hand brushed the leather of her wallet. Before she reached for anything, her voice carried out, steady and sharp. "My name is Naomi Carter. I am a United States citizen, and I do not consent to a search of my belongings based on an unsubstantiated claim. If you believe you have legal grounds to do so, state them clearly. Otherwise, this should begin where it belongs, with the truth, not with a scapegoat." The younger officer blinked, like a window had opened in a stifling room. The older one frowned, jaw tight. Richard started to speak, but Naomi had already shifted her gaze to Marta, then back to Clara. "Your phone," Naomi said evenly. "If it slipped from your pocket, it's likely wedged in the seat seam." Before turning me into a suspect, maybe. You should just look. Clara froze. Richard growled, "We don't need—" "Yes, you do," the younger officer cut in, surprising everyone. He crouched with his flashlight, hands sliding into the narrow gap. The cabin held its breath. Naomi stood tall, hands by her sides, the watch band on her wrist cinching tighter. She thought of all the times she'd been told, "Just cooperate, it'll be easier." But some things, once surrendered, are lost forever. Flashlight clicked off. The young officer straightened, eyes uncertain. "I don't see it." His voice was barely above a whisper, as though afraid to break something fragile. The older cop's mouth hardened. Naomi's fingers brushed the edge of her wallet. "If they take one more step, I'll pull the card," she told herself. Not to boast, but to reset the axis. Before she did, she looked once more at Marta. "You can still choose fairness," she said quietly. "All you have to do is kneel down and look." Marta hesitated, then crouched beside the seat, fingers fishing along the seam. A soft clink broke the silence metal against glass. Clara jerked upright, face flushing pale and red at once. There, glinting under the cabin light, lay a gold iPhone. For a moment, no one spoke. Then everyone did. Naomi hadn't revealed her card, not yet. But the line had been drawn thin as hair, sharp as a blade, between seeking the truth and seeking someone to blame, and she knew this was only the beginning. The cabin didn't breathe for several seconds. The gold iPhone sat there on the carpet like a smoking gun, glowing beneath the harsh overhead lights. Clara gasped and clutched her pearls. An old-school move straight from community theater. "Oh my goodness!" she cried, voice pitched just a little too high. "How careless of me, it must have slipped. Right there the whole time." Her laugh was brittle, like glass cracking under stress. "How embarrassing." Naomi didn't move. She simply watched. 1 beat, 2 beats. Silence stretched across the cabin like wire pulled taut. Every eye darted between the phone, Clara's flushed face, and Naomi's unmoving calm. Richard broke first. "Well," he said gruffly, puffing out his chest. "Seems we've cleared that up, just a misunderstanding." His hand twitched toward his wife's shoulder, as if guiding her back into the safe zone of innocence. Naomi tilted her head. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, voice low and cold. "That's an interesting word for what just happened." The younger officer shifted, uncomfortable. The older one, still bristling with authority, growled, "All right, folks, let's get everyone seated and calm. No harm done." But the harm had been done. Everyone knew it. The harm wasn't in the lost phone, it was in the assumptions. The finger pointing. The ready-made script that cast one passenger as suspect, the moment he or she fit the part. Naomi finally bent down, not to touch the phone, but to retrieve her leather tote. She placed it deliberately on her lap, hands resting lightly on the straps. She didn't need to show what was inside, not yet. But her posture said everything. "I control this moment now." "Not you." She looked at the officers. "Before you leave," she said evenly, "I'd like your names and badge numbers." The older one blinked. "Excuse me? Your names?" "Your badge numbers." "Please," Naomi repeated, every syllable clipped and precise. Passengers stirred, sensing the shift in power. A man in 3B glanced up from his laptop. The woman across the aisle leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Everyone could feel it. The script was unraveling. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Ramirez. Badge 5082. The older one hesitated, then muttered, "Thompson. 7341. Naomi nodded once, storing it away like ammunition. "Thank you, officers. You'll be hearing from me again." Clara tried one last desperate pivot. "Senator," she began, then froze, realizing she had revealed too much. Her hand flew to her mouth. The word hung there, electric. Passengers looked from Clara to Naomi, realization dawning. Whispers hissed through the cabin. Senator. Naomi's eyes locked onto Clara's, unblinking. She hadn't planned to reveal herself here, not like this. But the name was out, tossed carelessly into the air. So she stood. Slowly, deliberately. She drew her wallet from her tote, slid out the dark leather holder, and flipped it open. One side gleamed with her diplomatic passport. The other displayed the blue and gold Senate ID card. Naomi Carter, United States Senator. Gasps rippled through the cabin like a wave breaking against rock. Richard's jaw went slack. Clara staggered back into her seat, face blanching to chalk. Thompson's color drained so fast he looked ill. Ramirez just exhaled, as though a weight he hadn't realized he carried had suddenly doubled. Naomi let the silence linger. Let the power of the reveal do its work. Then she spoke. "Let's be very clear," she said, voice steady but vibrating with authority. "What happened here was not a misunderstanding. It was an accusation built on nothing more than prejudice. And when confronted with that prejudice, instead of questioning it, she glanced at Thompson, then Ramirez, then Marta, chose to reinforce it. Her gaze swept the cabin, pinning each face. You looked at me, what I was wearing, the color of my skin, and decided I was guilty. That is the real harm, not the lost phone. Not the wasted minutes. No one moved. Even the hum of the engine seemed to dull. Richard found his voice first. "Senator Carter, please," he stammered, sweat blooming at his temples. "My wife was distraught. She didn't think clearly. Surely we can put this behind us." Naomi lifted a hand, silencing him with a gesture so sharp it cut his words mid-sentence. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, using his name like a verdict. "You didn't just doubt me. You weaponized your privilege. You demanded officers. You demanded I be searched, humiliated, criminalized, all to satisfy your bias." Richard recoiled as if struck. Clara whispered, We didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you did," Naomi snapped, steel finally breaking through. Her calm. Then she lowered her tone, colder now, sharper. "And you're terrified, not sorry. As you should be." The younger officer Ramirez shifted again, shame written across his face. Thompson glared, defensive, but his bluster had vanished. Naomi tucked her ID away, then lifted her tote onto her shoulder. "Captain," she called toward the cockpit. Rodriguez, who had been frozen near the galley, jolted upright. "Yes, Senator?" "I require my checked luggage to be offloaded immediately. I will not continue this flight under the supervision of a crew that facilitated harassment and baseless accusations. And you will provide me with the names and employee numbers of every crew member on board. Do I make myself clear?" The captain swallowed. "Yes, Senator, at once." Naomi glanced once at Marta, whose eyes shimmered with something like shame. Then at Ramirez, who couldn't meet her gaze. And finally, at Clara, who clutched her reclaimed iPhone like it was a lifeline. Naomi's voice softened, just slightly. "You thought you were dealing with someone powerless. Instead, you've given me every reason to expose this for what it is, a systemic failure. And I assure you, I will." She walked down the aisle, each step deliberate, each passenger watching. In stunned silence, at row 3, she paused. A woman with dark skin and sharp, intelligent eyes, someone Naomi had noticed earlier scribbling notes, met her gaze. Naomi gave her the smallest nod. A silent acknowledgement. "I saw you." "Thank you." Then she was gone, disappearing through the door into the jet bridge, leaving behind an entire cabin of witnesses who would never forget the moment the mask slipped. And the truth was laid bare. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing off the stunned silence of the cabin. The jet bridge smelled faintly of rubber and metal, that in-between space where the private world of a plane gave way to the sprawling machinery of an airport. Naomi inhaled deeply, letting the recycled air sting her lungs. Each step she took away from that cabin felt like crossing a border out of theater, into action. At the far end, A baggage handler in reflective vest stood waiting with a small roller bag. Her bag. They had moved quickly. The captain must have barked the order the second she demanded it. Naomi accepted it with a nod, the handler's eyes widening when he recognized her face. "Senator Carter," he whispered, almost reverently. She didn't respond, just pulled the handle up and rolled forward. Phone already in her hand. Her thumb found the familiar number. Michael Harris, her chief of staff. He answered on the first ring. "Naomi?" His voice was sharp with concern. "We saw chatter online something happened on the flight." "I'm fine," she said, her tone clipped, measured. "But listen carefully, this wasn't just an incident. It's going to be a turning point." She paced the length of the jet bridge, her heels clicking against the ridged metal floor, every stride controlled. "First, cancel my afternoon schedule. Push back the hospital visit until later tonight. I'll still see Dad before midnight. Book me on Delta, next available to LaGuardia. Use congressional funds. This is now official business." "Done," Michael replied. She could already hear his keyboard rattling. "Second, I need a line open to Chief Daniels at the Port Authority Police. Tell him I'll be filing a formal complaint regarding 2 of his officers, Thompson and Ramirez, for misconduct and violation of civil rights. I want him on the phone with me within 30 minutes, no excuses. Understood? Third," she continued, her voice lowering to steel, "get me direct numbers for the CEO of Ascender, Laura Sandoval. Office line, cell, home, if possible. Tonight, she's going to learn what accountability sounds like." Michael whistled softly. "That bad?" Naomi stopped pacing, her hand tightening on the handle of her roller bag. Through the small window of the jet bridge, she caught sight of 2 uniformed officers emerging from the plane. Their posture suddenly diminished. "No longer lions but shadows. It's worse," she said quietly. Because it wasn't just them. It was the entire chain: passengers, crew, law enforcement, choosing the easy path of bias over the hard path of truth. "That's the system talking, Michael. And the system just gave me every reason to write a bill they won't be able to ignore." There's a pause on the line, the kind of silence when an aide knows their boss is about to launch a war. Then Michael spoke. "What do you want to call it?" Naomi's eyes hardened. "The Passenger Dignity Act. Start a file. Pull every FAA complaint about discriminatory treatment over the last 5 years. I want patterns, lawsuits, settlements. Build me the backbone of a hearing." On it, Naomi ended the call. The jet bridge hummed with the faint vibrations of the plane behind her, but she was already thinking 10 steps ahead. At the terminal door, Thompson and Ramirez stood waiting. Thompson's face was flushed, his jaw tight, defensive anger brewing under his skin. Ramirez, by contrast, looked like a man carrying a secret too heavy for his frame. Naomi stopped in front of them. Her silence made them fidget. Then she spoke, calm as ever. "You'll both file written statements of what transpired on that plane. Full accounts. By close of business today. If they're not on my desk, I'll subpoena them. Do you understand?" Thompson started to bluster. "Senator, with respect." "Respect?" Naomi's voice sliced the word in half. "You approached me with presumption of guilt, escalated without probable cause, and threatened arrest for nothing more than existing in a hoodie. That isn't respect, that's misconduct." Thompson's mouth opened, then closed. His flush deepened. Naomi shifted to Ramirez, her tone softening just enough. "You knew it was wrong. I saw it in your hesitation, yet you stood silent. Do better in your statement than you did on that plane." Ramirez dropped his gaze. "Yes, Senator." She turned sharply, pulling her bag toward the terminal. She didn't need to say more. The weight of her words trailed behind her like jet wake. Inside the terminal, passengers streamed past, most oblivious to the storm that had just broken 30 feet away. Naomi moved through them like a current, phone buzzing in her palm. Notifications from staff, from reporters, from colleagues already pinging her about what was unfolding online. She ignored them. For now, she ducked into the Delta Sky Club, the hush of carpet and leather seating a sudden cocoon. At a corner table, she set down her bag, opened her laptop, and began to draft. Not a statement for the press, not yet, but the opening lines of legislation. Words meant not to soothe, but to etch into law. Passengers shall not be subjected to searches, detainment, or removal based on unsubstantiated accusations rooted in BIAC. Her fingers flew. Around her, the lounge buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses. But Naomi's world had narrowed to text on a screen and the echo of her father's voice in her head. Don't let their smallness make you small. This wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about every traveler who didn't carry a Senate ID to shield them. Every time someone's dignity was stripped away in the name of someone else's comfort, she leaned back, flexed her hand, and let the weight of what had just begun settle into her bones. A storm had broken at 30,000 feet. Now it was time to turn turbulence into law. Naomi Carter had made plenty of difficult phone calls in her career. She'd stared down governors over budgets, pressed reluctant senators into late-night compromises, even rebuked generals in classified hearings. But this one felt different. This wasn't Washington maneuvering. This was personal. Born from humiliation, sharpened into resolve. Her phone buzzed with an incoming number, unlisted, D.C. area code. Right on time, Senator Carter, came a measured voice. This is Chief Daniels of the Port Authority Police. My office said you wanted to speak immediately. Naomi didn't waste a breath. Chief, 2 of your officers boarded my flight this morning. Officer Thompson escalated an unfounded accusation into threats of arrest without probable cause. Officer Ramirez stood by. I want a formal investigation, and I expect both written statements on my desk tonight. A pause. Naomi could almost hear him recalibrating. Senator, I take these matters very seriously. I'll need to review. You'll do more than review, Naomi cut in, her voice sharp enough to pin him through the line. You'll discipline. Thompson's conduct was unconstitutional and dangerous. Ramirez failed in his duty to intervene. And if I don't see swift action, Chief, I'll drag this entire department into a Senate hearing where your policies or lack thereof will be dissected on national television. The silence on the line thickened. When Daniels finally spoke, his voice was lower, tighter. Understood. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. You'll get back to me tonight, Naomi said. Good day, Chief. She ended the call before he could respond. Her tea had gone cold. She pushed it aside and reached for her laptop. A text from Michael popped up. Got Sandoval's numbers. Office cell. Home. Naomi didn't hesitate. She dialed the cell first at 3 rings. Then a crisp, professional voice answered. Lavra Sandoval. Miss Sandoval, this is Senator Naomi Carter. A breath caught on the other end. Senator, yes, of course. I was just briefed. I want to offer my deepest apologies. Naomi's tone was calm, but lethal in its precision. I'm not calling to hear apologies. I'm calling to inform you what happens next. Within 72 hours, my office expects a complete record of every discrimination complaint filed against Ascender over the past decade, every resolution, every training protocol, every internal memo related to bias incidents. Senator, some of that is proprietary. Then prepare to see it subpoenaed, Naomi cut in. The only choice you have is whether you cooperate willingly or fight me in the open. And I promise you, Miss Sandoval, I will win that fight. The CEO's voice faltered. We will cooperate fully. Good. In addition, Naomi continued, her voice cool as steel, I will be introducing legislation, the Passenger Dignity Act. It will establish federal standards for how airlines and airport police handle accusations in flight. Ascender will support it publicly as evidence of your commitment to change. You will put your name beside mine." On the other end, Sandoval's chair creaked faintly, a woman shifting under the weight of inevitability. "Yes, Senator. We'll support it." "Excellent. My office will send the draft tomorrow. Good night, Miss Sandoval." The line went dead. Naomi sat back, exhaled, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the plane, allowed herself a small, grim smile. By the time she reached her father's hospital room that night, the story had already exploded online. A shaky cell phone video from row 3 captured the moment she revealed her Senate ID. The gasp from Clara Whitmore, the color draining from Thompson's face, it was all there, raw and undeniable. The clip spread like fire. By evening, hashtags burned across Twitter. Hashtag flying while black, hashtag stand with Naomi, hashtag passengers dignity. News outlets scrambled. Her office's carefully worded statement only fanned the flames. Senator Carter experienced a baseless accusation and discriminatory treatment aboard Ascendair Flight 237. She is reviewing all appropriate responses. Cable news split screens lit up footage of Naomi, beside grainy video from the cabin, pundits parsing every word. Supporters called her brave. Critics muttered about political theater. But the public ordinary, travelers with their own scars of indignity, saw themselves in her calm defiance. 2 days later, Naomi's office conference room buzzed with energy. Legislative aides clattered laptops. Michael Harris stood at the whiteboard sketching bullet points, training, complaint process, oversight, penalties. Naomi leaned against the table, arms crossed, listening as Jamal, her policy director, ran through the latest data. FAA reports show complaints of racial profiling up 32% in the last 3 years, he said, tapping the board. And that's only what's filed. Civil suits suggest it's higher. Carriers have settled millions in payouts quietly. Perfect, Naomi said. I want those numbers in my opening statement. Michael turned. Senator, we'll face brutal pushback. The airline lobby's already circling. Expect pressure from both sides of the aisle. Naomi's gaze hardened. Let them circle. They just handed me the perfect case study on video with witnesses in broad daylight. If the airlines want to fight, they'll be fighting against every passenger who's ever been humiliated at 30,000 feet. She picked up a marker and drew a line across the board beneath the bullet points. This isn't customer service. This is civil rights. And that's how we'll frame it. That night, back in her apartment overlooking the Capitol Dome, Naomi finally slowed down. She sat by the window, sipping chamomile, her laptop glowing in the dark. Her father's words echoed in her memory. Don't let their smallness make you small. She opened a fresh document and began to write not legislation, not speeches, a letter. To her father. Dad, today I remembered every lesson you ever taught me about dignity. Her fingers hesitated, then pressed on. She wasn't sure she'd ever send it. But she needed to set the words down. Because this fight wasn't just political. It was personal. And it had only just begun. The Senate Commerce Committee chamber was packed. Reporters jammed every row, their cameras trained on the witness table. The buzz of whispered conversations hummed beneath the gilded ceiling. Today wasn't just another hearing on aviation policy. It was a spectacle, part reckoning, part theater, and Naomi Carter knew it. At the dais, she adjusted her microphone. Her notes sat neatly stacked, but she didn't glance at them. She wanted to look every witness, every skeptic, every camera straight in the eye. Good morning, the chair began, gavel striking once. This hearing of the Senate Commerce Committee is now in session. We convene to examine the treatment of airline passengers, specifically issues of discrimination and bias. We have before U.S. Senator Naomi Carter of Illinois, whose recent experience aboard Ascendair Flight 237 has sparked national debate. Senator, thank you for being here. Naomi inclined her head. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair turned toward the witness table. Also present, Ms. Lavra Sandoval, CEO of Ascendair, Chief Daniels of the Port Authority Police, and Dr. Amara Wilson, Professor of Sociology at Georgetown University. The camera zoomed in. Each face told its own story. Sandoval's polished calm stretched thin over nerves. Daniel's stiff posture betraying defensiveness. Dr. Wilson's quiet confidence, her laptop open beside her. The chair gestured. "Senator Carter, you may begin." Naomi leaned forward, her voice even, steady, filling the chamber without theatrics. On October 18th, I boarded Ascendair Flight 237 as a daughter flying home to see her father in the hospital. I was dressed casually, a cardigan, jeans, nothing more. Mid-flight, a fellow passenger accused me of stealing a phone. Without evidence, without cause, I was asked to submit my belongings for inspection. When I refused because no citizen should be forced to prove innocence on the whim of prejudice, police were called to meet the plane. She paused, letting the silence hang. I then revealed my identity as a United States Senator. That changed everything. But let me be clear, if I had not been a senator, if I had simply been Naomi Carter, citizen, that flight would have ended with me in handcuffs. That is the reality millions of Americans face every day in airports, in stores, in classrooms. Judged. Guilty by appearance, not by evidence. Her gaze swept the room, steady as a searchlight. This isn't about me. It's about the system. And it's why I am introducing the Passenger Dignity Act. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters typed furiously. The chair nodded. "Thank you, Senator. We'll now hear from Ms. Sandoval." Lavra Sandoval leaned into her mic. "First, I want to express Ascendair's regret for what occurred. No passenger should feel targeted. We are reviewing training protocols and have already instituted new procedures to ensure complaints are handled with fairness." Naomi's eyes narrowed. Safe, polished, rehearsed. A Republican senator from Texas, William Bradford, seized his turn. "Ms. Sandoval, thank you for your swift response. Senator Carter, with all due respect, isn't this just an isolated misunderstanding? We can't regulate every human interaction out of existence. Don't you worry, you're turning one unpleasant flight into a federal overreach." The question was bait, dripping with condescension. Naomi didn't flinch. "Senator Bradford," she said calmly, "I would agree if this were isolated. But FAA data shows a 32% increase in bias-related complaints in the past 3 years. Civil lawsuits tell the same story. What happened to me was recorded and went viral, but countless others never make headlines. We don't dismiss car crashes as isolated, we pass seatbelt laws. Why should dignity be treated as less important than safety?" Applause broke out in the gallery before the chair banged the gavel. Bradford frowned. Chief Daniels cleared his throat. "Our officers responded as they would to any theft report. They acted to maintain order," Naomi cut in. "Chief, with respect, one officer threatened me with arrest before even investigating. That's not maintaining order. That's misconduct. Tell this committee, is it standard practice in your department to treat accusations as proof?" Daniel's jaw worked. "No, Senator, it is not. Then why did it happen?" Naomi pressed. "Was it because I was in a cardigan instead of a suit? Because I was a black woman in first class? Or because your officers have not been trained to recognize bias when it stares them in the face?" The chamber fell silent. Daniel shifted, his uniform suddenly too heavy. "We are conducting a full review," he said stiffly. Naomi leaned back, voice cool. "Conduct your review. But understand Congress will be conducting ours." Dr. Wilson spoke next, her tone precise, clinical. "What Senator Carter experienced is textbook profiling. My research shows that when authority figures are pressured to resolve quickly, they default to stereotypes. In flight, that means passengers of color are disproportionately suspected, searched, or removed." She tapped her laptop. "In my data set, Black passengers were 3 times more likely to be flagged for security involvement than white passengers. In identical circumstances. Gasps and murmurs spread across the room. The narrative was no longer an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Senator Hayes, a moderate Republican from Ohio, leaned forward. "Senator Carter, I have biracial grandchildren. I don't want them growing up in a country where their mere presence is treated as suspicion. I'll co-sponsor your bill." The chamber erupted, journalists whispering, cameras flashing. Hayes's support cracked the partisan wall. Naomi allowed herself the faintest smile. "Thank you, Senator Hayes. This bill is not about left or right. It's about right and wrong." The chair struck his gavel again. "This hearing is adjourned." The witnesses stood. Sandoval gathered her papers with trembling fingers. "Daniels." Avoided Naomi's eyes. Dr. Wilson slipped Naomi a quick nod of solidarity. As Naomi walked out, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust toward her. "Senator Carter, do you think the Passenger Dignity Act will pass?" Naomi stopped, facing the cameras squarely. "That depends on whether my colleagues are willing to look beyond their own comfort and see the truth every traveler of color already knows. What happened to me should never happen to anyone. Not on a plane, not anywhere. And I intend to make sure it doesn't." Her words echoed down the marble hallway, carried by headlines before the hour was out. Naomi left the hearing chamber, exhausted but unbowed. The marble hall outside buzzed with reporters, their voices overlapping, questions flying like darts. Michael and 2 aides flanked her, forming a moving shield as she strode toward the elevators. The cameras caught her steady face, the slight lift of her chin, but not the quickened beat of her heart. She knew the battle had only just begun. That evening, in her office overlooking the Capitol Dome, Naomi sat across from Michael, who was scrolling grimly through his tablet. "They're coming for us," he said, not bothering to sugarcoat. "Airline lobbyists are mobilizing. We've already had 3 calls from donors warning they'll pull support if this bill advances. Conservative media is spinning today's hearing as your grandstanding moment." Naomi rubbed her temples, fatigue pressing at the edges of her resolve. "Let them come. We expected this." Michael set the tablet down, his voice softer. "Yes, but this isn't just about airlines anymore. The Chamber of Commerce is worried. They're framing it as government overreach. If the feds can tell airlines how to handle passengers, what's next? Hotels? Restaurants? Every customer interaction? That's the narrative they'll push." Naomi leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She could almost hear her father's voice, patient and insistent. "Don't let their smallness make you small." She lowered her gaze. "Then we reframe it. This isn't regulation, it's protection. Seatbelt laws didn't kill airlines. Civil rights laws didn't kill business. They made the country stronger. We need stories, Michael. Not just data. Stories that remind people this isn't abstract, it's human." The following days blurred into a storm of meetings. Airline lobbyists packed committee offices, whispering promises of campaign contributions and warnings of lost jobs. Editorials appeared questioning Naomi's motives. One national pundit sneered on live TV. If Senator Carter didn't want attention, why reveal her Senate ID? Maybe she orchestrated the whole scene for her agenda. Naomi watched the clip. In silence in her office, jaw tightening. Michael switched off the screen, studying her. "We can't let them control the narrative. You need allies, visible ones." And allies came, though not always the ones she expected. Senator Hayes of Ohio, the moderate Republican who had spoken at the hearing, invited Naomi to lunch in the members' dining room. Over chicken salad and iced tea, Hayes leaned in, her voice low. "I've already gotten angry calls from industry donors, but I don't care. My grandkids matter more. You'll have my support, and I'll bring a few others if you keep this." Bipartisan, Naomi smiled for the first time that week. Bipartisan is the only way this survives. Meanwhile, Dr. Wilson became an unexpected force outside the Capitol. Her testimony had gone viral. Excerpts of her data-driven analysis shared across social media and evening news shows. She began appearing on panels, her calm authority dismantling the narrative of isolated incidents. A CNN anchor asked her bluntly, "Why should the average traveler care?" And she answered, "Because dignity isn't a perk of first class. It's a right, no matter your seat, your color, or your clothes." Still, opposition hardened. Senator Bradford, with his Texas drawl and deep ties to the airline industry, maneuvered behind the scenes to stall the bill. He met privately with wavering colleagues, urging them to delay. 6 months of study, he argued. Let the heat die down. It was an old tactic: delay until the public forgot. Naomi anticipated it. In a late-night strategy meeting with her staff, she outlined their counterattack. "We won't let them stall. We'll take this fight outside the chamber. Town halls, op-eds, will put real people in front of cameras, those who don't have Senate IDs to protect them." Within a week, her office organized a roundtable of passengers who had experienced similar humiliations. A veteran escorted off a flight for looking unstable. A Latina teacher forced to empty her purse in front of students. A black teenager accused of sneaking into first class because he had traded frequent flyer points with his uncle. Their stories aired on national networks, amplifying Naomi's message far louder than any policy paper could. The tide began to shift. Polls showed public opinion tilting in her favor. Hashtags spread again, this time driven not by outrage but by solidarity. Hashtag dignity for all, hashtag IST, and with Naomi. Airlines quietly panicked, worried that being seen as obstructionists would do more damage than regulation ever could. But Naomi knew victory was far from assured. In a private meeting, Senator Hayes warned her, "Bradford has the votes to bury this in committee if he wants. You'll need at least 3 Republicans on board to force it out." That night, Naomi sat in her apartment, lights dim, the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. She thought of her father in the hospital, of his hand squeezing hers with fading strength, of his words about truth and power. She thought of the girl she'd once been, the law student asked to speak for the minority perspective. She thought of the woman on Flight 237, accused of theft because of a cardigan and skin color. And she thought of the millions who would never sit at this desk, never have the microphone she now held, but whose dignity mattered just as much. She picked up her pen and began drafting her floor speech. Her words were steady, deliberate. This is not about airlines. This is about America's promise that all are created equal and treated equal, even at 30,000 feet. She wrote deep into the night until the lines blurred on the page. At dawn, she folded the draft neatly, slid it into her leather folder, and whispered to the empty room, "They think they can wait us out, but this time, the waiting is over." Naomi's bill reached the Commerce Committee markup like a ship entering a storm. Lobbyists had swarmed the Hill for weeks, slipping briefing packets under doors, buying dinners, whispering warnings. Senators who smiled politely in the hallway began dodging her gaze. Even some in her own party worried the bill was moving too fast, that the airline industry's backlash could cost them in swing states. The morning of the markup, Naomi stood in her office before a wall of windows overlooking the Capitol lawn. Michael adjusted his tie nervously, scanning the day's whip count. "We're at 12 yes, 11 no, and 3 undecided. If 2 of those swing the wrong way, Bradford buries this in committee." Naomi slipped her father's worn fountain pen into her folder. "Then we make sure at least 2 swing the right way." The committee room was smaller than the grand chamber, where the hearings had been held, but the tension was thicker. Each senator sat with stacks of amendments before them, some substantive, others poison pills designed to gut her bill without openly opposing it. Airline lobbyists lined the back wall, their suits sharp, their eyes calculating. Cameras were absent, but the stakes were higher than ever. Bradford wasted no time. He proposed an amendment to delay implementation for further study. His voice dripped with practiced reason. We don't legislate on emotion. We legislate on facts. Let's take 6 months to gather more data. Naomi leaned forward, microphone catching the quiet steel in her tone. Senator, every day we delay is another day passengers are humiliated and harassed without recourse. The facts are already here. The only thing missing is courage. A few heads turned, some supportive, others annoyed. Bradford's smile thinned. He filed 2 more amendments, each one carving away at enforcement provisions. One would remove fines against airlines, replacing them with recommendations. Another would limit oversight to voluntary reporting. One by one, his allies spoke. In favor. Naomi countered each calmly, citing affidavit, court cases, personal testimony, but she could feel momentum slipping. By mid-afternoon, the vote looked grim. Hayes caught her eye across the dais, giving a small shake of her head. Not enough. During a recess, Naomi stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. Michael leaned close. We're losing, Naomi. Unless someone. Unexpected flips, this dies here. She pressed her palms together, breathing slow. Down the corridor, Senator Thornton of South Carolina emerged from his office. A staunch conservative, he had opposed her on nearly every civil rights measure. He was the last man anyone expected to break ranks. Yet he paused when he saw her. Senator Carter, he said, his southern drawl subdued. My granddaughter saw that video of you on the plane. Asked me why the police were so mean to you. I didn't have an answer. Naomi held his gaze, searching for posturing, but found only a flicker of unease. You don't owe me an answer, Senator, she said softly. But you owe her one. Thornton shifted, the weight of his granddaughter's question heavier than any lobbyist's argument. I can't promise I'll back the whole bill, but I won't kill it today. He tipped his head slightly and walked on, back in session. When the clerk called the roll, Thornton's voice rang out. No to delay. No to gutting enforcement. Gasps rippled across the room. Bradford stiffened, realizing the math had shifted beneath his feet. Hayes smiled faintly. The final tally. 14 yes, 12 no. The Passenger Dignity Act cleared committee by a single vote. As the gavel struck, Naomi felt a rush of relief tempered by the knowledge of what came next. The floor fight would be fiercer, the stakes higher. The airlines would double their efforts, conservative media would sharpen their knives, and every weakness in her past would be dredged up. Yet as she walked out into the hallway, Michael at her side, she felt steadier than ever. Thornton's unexpected crack in the wall of opposition proved something she had believed since the moment she stood in that airplane aisle. Prejudice was powerful, but truth had a way of finding the smallest opening and breaking through. She paused before the cameras waiting outside, the flashbulbs already igniting. The committee has spoken, she said, her voice carrying over the reporters' clamor. Today, we moved one step closer to ensuring that dignity is not a privilege, but a right for every passenger in America. The fight is far from over, but we are not backing down. The questions flew, but she had already turned toward the Capitol steps. The battle for the Senate floor loomed like a storm cloud, yet she walked into it with her head high, carrying her father's words like armor. Stand in your truth, Naomi, and never let their smallness make you small. Naomi barely slept the week her bill hit the Senate calendar. Every morning, her phone lit up with new polls, new attacks, new whispers. The airlines had unleashed a blitz. Full-page ads in major papers. Executives on business shows warning of crippling costs and government overreach. Conservative commentators mocked her as the Cardigan Crusader, insisting she was manufacturing outrage. Even a few moderates in her own party grew skittish. wondering aloud if the issue was worth a bruising floor fight. But every time Naomi felt the pressure closing in, she thought of her father's voice and her mother's steady hand. She thought of that humiliating moment on the plane when her humanity had been reduced to a suspect's shadow. And she reminded herself, this wasn't about her comfort. It was about the countless others without her shield. On the morning of the vote, she stood in her office with Michael, reviewing the latest whip count. "We're at 58 committed," he said. "Maybe 60 if Hayes's group holds. That's enough to pass, but Bradford's lobbying hard. He only needs a couple of defections to flip momentum." Naomi set down her coffee, the steam curling like smoke from a battlefield. "Then we hold the line. And we make it clear that history is watching." The Senate floor was a theater of quiet tension. Senators filled their desks, aides whispering in ears, lobbyists pacing just outside the chamber doors. Reporters crammed the gallery, pens poised. Naomi sat straight-backed at her desk, the bill folder in front of her, her father's fountain pen resting atop it. The presiding officer gavelled the session to order. Bradford rose almost immediately, his voice smooth as honey and sharp as glass. "Colleagues, no one condones discrimination. But this bill is a sledgehammer where a scalpel is needed. It burdens airlines with costly mandates, exposes them to frivolous lawsuits, and does nothing to address the root of the issue, human imperfection. Let's not legislate based on a viral video. Let's legislate wisely." Polite applause followed, mostly from his allies. Naomi waited until the chamber quieted, then stood. Her heart thudded, but her voice emerged calm, resonant. "Mr. President, this is not about a viral video. It is about the American promise that every person deserves. Dignity, whether in a courtroom, a classroom, or 30,000 feet above the ground. I did not ask to be accused. I did not ask to become a symbol. But I will not let what happened to me be dismissed as an inconvenience, when it is a daily reality for so many." She reached for her folder, pulling out a stack of letters. "These are from passengers across the country. A veteran escorted off a flight because his PTSD medication made him seem unstable. A Latina teacher humiliated in front of her students. A teenager accused of sneaking into first class because he didn't look the part. Their stories are not frivolous. Their pain is not a nuisance. Their dignity is not negotiable." The chamber stilled. Even her opponents leaned forward. Naomi placed the letters back down. If airlines can charge a fee for a bag, they can be held accountable when they strip a citizen of dignity. That is what this bill says. Nothing more radical than fairness. Nothing more costly than decency. For a moment, the only sound was the scratch of reporters' pens. Then Hayes rose from across the aisle, her voice firm. "I am a Republican, and I am co-sponsoring this bill, not because it's easy, but because it's right. My grandchildren are biracial. I want them to grow up in a country where no one doubts they belong. That starts with us." It was the crack Naomi had fought for, the bipartisan fracture Bradford couldn't patch. The whip count shifted in real time. Senators who had wavered glanced at Hayes, then at Naomi, and saw the safer side of history. The presiding officer called the roll. One by one, voices echoed through the chamber. "Aye, nay, aye, aye." Naomi gripped her pen, her knuckles white. Bradford scowled, whispering urgently to an ally 2 rows down, "Mr. Thornton." The chamber hushed. All eyes turned to the South Carolina senator, the conservative who had once been her fiercest critic. He cleared his throat, his accent heavy. "Aye." The sound broke like a wave. Gasps rippled. Bradford's face drained. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, steadying the swell of relief. When the final tally was announced, the chamber erupted. 68 in favor, 32 against. The Passenger Dignity Act had passed. Naomi rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment press into her bones. Around her, Colleagues offered handshakes, pats on the shoulder, murmured congratulations. But she thought of something else, her father's frail hand in hers, whispering that power wasn't about control, but about standing in truth. She glanced up at the gallery. Among the press and visitors, she spotted Dr. Wilson, watching intently. Her expression a mixture of triumph and solemnity. Naomi gave the faintest nod. The professor nodded back. Two women from different walks of life, bound by a single conviction. Dignity was worth fighting for. Outside, the rotunda filled with reporters shouting her name, but Naomi barely heard them. She stepped into the cool marble hallway, heart still, pounding, and whispered to herself, "We did it, Dad. We did it." The rose garden smelled faintly of spring, roses blooming against the crisp air of May. Naomi stood among her colleagues as the president signed the Passenger Dignity Act into law. Cameras clicked, applause swelled, and the polished wooden desk gleamed in the sunlight. Naomi smiled for the photographers, shook hands, and said the right words for the microphones, but her mind wasn't in the rose garden. It was in a hospital, room 200 miles away. 2 days later, Naomi was there back in Chicago, slipping quietly into her father's room at St. Mary's. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the beeping machines too steady. Her father lay propped against pillows, thinner now, but his eyes sparked with the same fire that had raised her. "You did it," he rasped when she entered. No preamble, no wasted breath. Just pride. Naomi set her bag down and took his hand. "We did it, Dad. Every person who spoke up, every witness who told the truth, every senator who found the courage to vote yes. I just carried their voices." Her father's hand was cool but steady. "Don't sell yourself short. You stood when others wanted you silent. That's the job." She laughed softly, blinking back tears. "I kept hearing your words on that floor. Never let their smallness make you small. I think half the Senate has heard them by now." He chuckled, the sound thin but warm. "Good, let them." Naomi stayed by his side that afternoon, reading aloud from Langston Hughes, the same worn collection she'd carried on the flight that had changed everything. Her father closed his eyes, letting her voice wash over him. For a little while, it felt less like a hospital and more like home. Outside the room, the world was moving quickly. Airlines scrambled to implement new protocols, mandatory bias training, independent review boards, transparent complaint processes. Hotel chains and rental car companies quietly adopted similar measures, hoping to stay ahead of scrutiny. Universities added Dr. Wilson's case study to their syllabi. Civil rights groups launched campaigns asking, "What would you have done?" Forcing Americans to reckon with their own silence. Naomi read about it in the papers, saw it on the news, but it was different hearing it from her constituents. Letters poured in. A woman thanking her for protecting her teenage son. A flight attendant relieved to finally have clear rules to lean on. A white businessman admitting he'd once stayed silent and vowing never to do so again. The law wasn't magic, it didn't erase prejudice, but it gave people tools. And sometimes tools were enough to start building something better. One evening, weeks later, Naomi sat on the porch of her childhood home, her father beside her. In a wheelchair, a blanket draped across his knees. The summer air was thick with the smell of cut grass and the sound of cicadas. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked suddenly. "All the time," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if I just opened my bag to keep the peace? If I hadn't pushed back?" Her father turned his head, his eyes steady. "Then you'd still be right here, but the world would be smaller. You didn't just fight for yourself, Naomi. You made space for others. That's the work." She swallowed hard, blinking at the horizon. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just patching holes in a ship that will always leak." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but every patch keeps someone from drowning. That's worth it." Silence stretched between them, not heavy but full. Naomi reached for his hand. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a senator or a symbol. She felt like a daughter. That fall, Naomi returned to Washington, where the bill's impact continued to ripple outward. In the Senate cafeteria, even colleagues who had voted no greeted her with newfound respect. Some confided privately about family members who had faced discrimination, about moments they had stayed quiet. The conversations weren't always comfortable, but they were real. Dr. Wilson visited her office, holding a freshly printed book, Invisible Boundaries, Expanded Edition. On the dedication page, Naomi found her own name. For Senator Naomi Carter, who refused to be diminished. Naomi hugged her tightly, the moment as meaningful as any applause in the chamber. Months passed. The law became just another statute in the code, its enforcement folded into the machinery of government. But its echoes lived on in classrooms, in training rooms, in the quiet choices of ordinary people, deciding whether to stay silent or to speak. On a gray winter morning, Naomi stood again at her father's grave, a simple headstone etched with his name and a line from Hughes. "I too sing America." Snow dusted the grass and her breath curled in the cold air. She laid her hand on the stone. "I hope you know," she whispered. "I'm still patching the ship." The wind stirred, cold but not cruel. Naomi straightened, her coat flaring against the chill, and turned back toward the city that still needed her voice. For the rest of her career, for the rest of her life, she carried that day on the plane, not as a wound, but as a compass. Proof that even when prejudice tried to diminish her, truth could turn the smallest stand into a movement. And somewhere beyond the marble chambers and polished headlines, in the quiet of her own heart, Naomi knew her father had been right. Power was never about control. It was about standing so firmly in your truth that the world, no matter how reluctant, had to see it too. On that day, Senator Naomi Carter didn't just clear her own name. She showed the world that dignity should never be treated as a privilege, but as a right. Her fight in that airplane cabin became a law that protects millions. But more than that, it became a reminder that silence in the face of injustice is never neutral. The world may not always change overnight, but it does change when ordinary people choose to stand in their truth. If this story moved you, share it, leave your thoughts below, and remember to subscribe. Because every story we tell together brings us one step closer to the dignity we all deserve.